Hey everybody, this is Mr. Moppin coming at you with another APUS history video. Today we're taking a look at topic 6.4, the New South. When we use this phrase, the New South, it is referring to the South following the Civil War and for the most part following Reconstruction. Now, we've talked about how devastating the Civil War was to the South. We saw infrastructure destroyed, farms destroyed, the entire Southern way of life, undergirded by slave labor, be destroyed. And we saw through Reconstruction attempts by Northerners in Congress to try to revolutionize the South politically and socially. And so the South is going to start to try to some degree, rebrand itself in this post-Reconstruction period. And what's important to understand to some degree with regards to the New South is that a lot of it is going to be spearheaded by Southerners themselves trying to rebrand this New South after the Civil War, as opposed to Reconstruction, where it was more of a kind of a Northern congressional kind of, imposed sense of change. So this is, the South kind of reimagining itself in the late 1800s. And as we'll take a look at it, when we think of the New South in the late 1800s, the question that, of course, is important to keep in mind is, to what degree will the South be new in this period? How will it change? But to some degree, how will it still hold on to some of the vestiges that had defined that region of America, when that period started? So, with that being said, let's first start to take a look at some things that will be defining change in the South during the late 1800s. And one of those things that is going to be noticeable is the growth of industry in the post-Civil War South. Remember, prior going into the Civil War, the South had, been proud of maintaining a heavily agriculturally centered economy, focused heavily on cotton, as we said, supported heavily by slave labor, that it didn't want to embrace a, kind of a modern, urban, industrial society that the North had been very, very open to. But that is going to start to change. You're going to be seeing new parts of industry come to the South that you really didn't see before the Civil War. For example, Birmingham, Alabama is going to be embracing the steel industry. What Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania is going to be for steel for the United States nationally, Birmingham, Alabama is going to be for the South. Some of you that know your college football really well may have heard of the annual Auburn, Alabama football game that takes place, and that's commonly referred to as the Iron Bowl. And in fact, that game used to be played for many, many years in the city of Birmingham. And that kind of speaks to the idea that, Birmingham's really going to be centered with steel industry in the post-Civil War years. Memphis, Tennessee is going to be embracing the lumber industry. Richmond is going to be producing tobacco. Richmond, Virginia is going to be producing tobacco on an industrial scale that we hadn't quite seen before. So for some of these things, it is going to be focusing in on crops like tobacco that have been, a major part of the region for a long time. But in some respects, it's going to be, really new areas of industry. Now, note, in order to get these industrial, operations up and moving, you needed investment. And the South, as we know from the Civil War, was crushed financially. So where's this money going to be coming from? Well, it's going to be coming from the North. And you needed to get Northerners to invest in the South as a way to make money. And so the idea being is, you had to convince Northerners that the South can be profitable after its destruction from the Civil War. And one of the leading voices in the South to promoting this idea of the New South is this guy right here. This is Henry Grady. Henry Grady was a writer, a journalist, centered out of Atlanta. And he is going to be, probably the most well-known person espousing the virtues of this new supposed modern South that's going to be embracing an industry, embracing a modern economic attitude. And he will be known for promoting the South in various parts of Northern America. giving speeches and lectures at, in Boston, New York, places like that, trying to encourage investors into opening up businesses and factories in the American South. Now, note, when we talk about this New South, this is really more from an economic standpoint, not from a social standpoint. None of these guys are talking about the idea of racial equality, for example. So understand, it's just trying to modernize the economy, not so much modernize things socially. And note, you're going to see some important effects of this New South economically emerging. For example, when we think, prior to the Civil War, of textile manufacturing, we thought of Massachusetts, we thought of New England, we thought of, mill towns like Lowell. That was the epicenter of the textile industry in America. But by the time we get to the end of the 1800s, it's now going to be the South. It's going to be the home of the textile mills, particularly in places like North Carolina, if you will. So you're going to be seeing that really important shift of where the textile is going to be made in America. Not as much as in New England, but now in the South, which is kind of an ironic twist. You know what I mean? The South is now going to be the textile manufacturing hub of America. Something else that's going to be noticeable to see the changes taking place in the South is a willingness to now embrace modern infrastructure. If you take a look, in 1870, right, shortly after the Civil War, we see from the legacy of the Civil War that the North had certainly embraced rail line, infrastructure way more than the South had. And as we know, that's going to be one of the factors that will lead to the North having the ability to win the war. But by the time we get to 1890, even though the South has not completely caught up to the North in terms of rail line development, it has certainly come a long way. It has certainly narrowed that gap considerably. So you can see that the South is embracing some of these modern, economic values from the North. More industry, more rail lines. So that's going to be significant to understand. However, this is going to come at a price. When we talk about, once again, getting the money, the investment needed to set up, these new Southern industries, it's going to be money coming in from the North. And these folks that are putting money into these new Southern factories are not particularly interested in improving the Southern way of life. They're interested in making money. And so the idea being is that, as they are making profits off of, North Carolina, textile mills and, Alabama steel mills and things like that, they're taking the bulk of that money and taking it back north to help, improve and fund northern states and northern communities. So understand that, going into the Civil War, the North had more money than the South. Clearly after the Civil War, during Reconstruction, the North had more money than the South. And that's only going to continue to expand as we go through the rest of the century. So understand that even though the South is modernizing economically, it is not catching up to the North financially. The North is going to be the dominant region in terms of wealth and status. The South is still going to be very poor, relatively speaking. Part of the problem that's going to hamper Southern growth in terms of finances is going to be lack of investment in technical schools. You'll see some, and particularly for African Americans, there's going to be some progress, like Tuskegee Institute. But on the whole, the South is just not going to have an educational infrastructure system on par with the North, which is going to further hamper the ability of Southerners to be able to kind of get that education, to get the technical skills needed to become financially successful, unlike their peers in the North. And so what is this going to lead to? Well, it's going to lead to a very clear disparity between Northerners and Southerners financially. The Northerners are going to be way wealthier than the Southerners on the whole. Take a look at this stat right here. A typical factory worker in the South is going to be making about half as much as a factory worker in the North, which we will learn wasn't that much to begin with. So these are folks that are working very long hours for very meager wages. So the economy is modernizing, but this is not helping the financial health of the average Southerner. So be mindful of the effects of that. Now, as much as things are going to be changing economically in the South, some things are going to be staying the same. Even though it is becoming more industrialized, it's still primarily an agriculturally based economy. That still has not changed. And, for example, it's still going to be heavily dependent on cotton. Cotton is only going to continue to grow in terms of production. And we're still going to see the continued growth of tenant farming and sharecropping, which we know is very financially manipulative of not only African Americans, but also poor whites as well. Understand that sharecropping is not purely targeting Black Americans. It's targeting poor people, really more than anything else. So that is going to be continuing to grow and expand. So, the traps, the dangers of sharecropping going to continue to expand. And as cotton expands in production, it's going to lower the prices of cotton, which then makes it harder for farmers to make any kind of money. Now, note, this is also going to be happening at a time in the late 1800s where farmers everywhere across America, be it the South, be it the Great Plains, wherever, doesn't matter if you're talking about producing cotton or corn or wheat or whatever it is, mechanized production of crops is going to lead to financial challenges for farmers nationally, and Southern farmers are not going to be exempt from it. So this is going to create tremendous challenges for those folks working and operating in the Southern farming industry, which was still, once again, the predominant economic sector of the South. Now, how to address some of these challenges for Southern farmers? Well, some of the ideas to try to address this is going to come from the idea of diversifying the types of products that you can maybe grow in the South, and kind of leading that charge is going to be famed scientist, inventor George Washington Carver. And at a time where Black Americans certainly did not have many opportunities, particularly those that lived in the South, Carver is going to be an exception. He is going to be one of the most famed teachers at the Tuskegee Institute, and he is going to be centering his education on basically innovations in farming. Carver is going to be promoting the idea of rotating different types of crops into the soil. Do not be so heavily reliant on cotton. For example, expand into peanuts, expand into sweet potatoes, things that may not be saturated in terms of an economy that can give farmers more ways to try to make profit in other areas of farming. Plus, with crop rotation, you can then have more nutrients put back into the soil. The idea being is if you keep growing the same crop in the same soil again and again and again, it depletes nutrients needed to have full, robust harvest. So Carver is going to be lauded and respected for trying to promote that in the South. The other way that you're going to see attempts to try to help farmers in America at the time is through the creation of these, for lack of a better term, farmers unions known as the Farmers Alliance. Now, we'll talk more about the Farmers Alliance at another time, but understand that the Farmers Alliance is going to be a national organization of basically local farmers unions. They're going to try to work together to address needs, be it sharing farming supplies, seed, whatever, but also working together to try to promote legislation that can help address the needs of farmers, be it cheaper shipping rates, the ability of the government to kind of regulate some of the rules regarding the shipping of farming products and things like that. And it did have some success nationally. However, the South is really going to short circuit its ability to have its Farmer Alliances chapters be effective because of the prevailing dominance of racism. White farmers did not have a willingness to have solidarity with Black farmers in the South at the same time. And since they prioritized racism over the idea of shared concerns as farmers, that's going to limit their ability to be able to try to overcome these challenges that farmers face nationally at this time period. So understand when we're talking about the late 1800s in the South, there are certainly aspects that would certainly define it as the New South, embracing industry and modern infrastructure, but it's still going to be a heavily agricultural society, heavily dependent on cotton, and racism is certainly not going away. So be mindful of how things will change yet stay the same in this late 1800s, quote-unquote, New South period. We'll see you next time.